Hello, everyone. Nice to see many of you joining our webinar today. Thanks for being here with us. If you want, you can type in the chat where you are joining from. And I'm very happy to introduce you to today's speaker, Pablo Toledo. He's our Senior Assessment Services Manager. He's based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and he's here today to talk about integrated learning and assessment. So, Pablo, the floor is yours. Thank you and welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much, Celeste. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's great to see that we have people joining us today. Let me have a quick rundown. We have people from Peru. We have people from Uruguay, Cerro Largo. Welcome aboard. Argentina, we have people from Pergamino, Buenos Aires, Guichon in Uruguay. That's amazing. Fernando from Colombia. Hello, Fernando. I think I know you. And we have Roxana also from Argentina. Villa Mercedes, San Luis, Ronald, welcome aboard, Córdoba, some of my favorite places, Arequipa, San Justo in Santa Fe, also from Argentina, lots of Argentina tonight, more people from Montevideo, Dolores, Rivera, Tacuarembó, Montevideo again, Uruguay is showing up in force, Ecuador, Francisco, welcome aboard, Jean as well, El Bolsón, Rio Negro, Esquel, Patagonia is coming in, Lima, well, Rosario, it's a great competition today to see who shows up in force. And I'm really happy that you are all coming here because the topic we'll be talking about today is super relevant and is really important because probably if you have been to one of our webinars or if you have heard me talk about issues or if you have seen some of the webinars that we've done together, we are always talking about issues connected with exam preparation, with assessment, with different aspects of it. But today, we're going to take a little step back because we are not going to talk about sort of how to prepare for an exam. We're not going to talk about specific skills for preparation. Today, we're going to look at a framework for how assessment, in a very broad sense of the word, integrates with the things that we do when we teach and how integrated learning and assessment is going to become, hopefully, one of your favorite, or ILA as we call it for short, is going to become, hopefully, one of your favorite acronyms, one of your favorite short phrases in the world of teaching. Well, that's wishful thinking. So, that's a long introduction. It's time that we start talking about something. We have a lot of people coming in, and we still have a few to come, I'm sure, this time of the afternoon. But without further ado, let me just show you some of the ideas that I would like to share with you tonight. As always, we have the Q&A box on the side. You have the chat window. If you want to drop questions, I will be asking you questions as we go. But if you want to drop questions as we move forward, I will be picking some of them up as we go. But we will also be leaving some of them for the end when we have some time for questions and answers. Well, questions for sure, answers, we'll see. So, integrating learning and assessment, the what, the why, and the how. So the first question is, what is integrated learning and assessment? And we're going to take a bit of a detour for that. Hold on, my computer. Okay. So we are very used to, or we always talk about teaching, and we talk about teaching and learning in the context of classroom, in the context of school teaching, in the context of the work that a teacher does, because that's what we do, that's who we are, that's what we love. But sometimes opening up to a different kind of comparison kind of opens up our perspective a little bit. And something that is similar to the work that we do is the work of a coach. If you think about it, sports coaching and teaching, or actually the kind of learning and development of competence that happens when we are learning a language, when we're learning English, and the kind of competence development that happens in sports, that happens when we are, for people who are learning a sport, for people who are improving in a sport, developing as players, is quite similar. We can talk, similarities, we're basically talking about competencies. So there are things that we know about the sports, there are things that we can practice individually. In language, you can practice independent skills, you can single out on the development of grammar, of vocabulary, of particular areas of language, but then you have to integrate all of that when you are performing, when you are communicating, when you're speaking. Now, in sports, we talk about, well, in this case, we have basketball. In basketball, there are lots of individual skills that you develop. Like you have to know how to dribble a ball, you have to know how to run with the ball, you have to know how to throw a ball and put it in the hoop, you have to know how to pass. But there are also things that have to do with how you play with others. In language, there are things that have to do not just with how I speak, but how I interact. The important thing in language is always interaction and communication. And in sports, it's the same thing, except for a few sports, like I can think of car racing, or I can think of maybe tennis, where you play individually or running. You are usually playing in a team. But even when you are playing individually, you have to think about what your competitor is doing, and you have to think about what is going on the other side. Like a tennis player is not just throwing a ball, they're throwing a ball and they're thinking about where the other player is standing and how they are responding, what their strategies are. And so so it is all, you're not just focusing on your own performance, you're focusing on how others are doing. So let's watch a short video that helps us frame the idea of coaching and teaching, how they connect, but also how assessment, or what is the role that assessment plays in that sort of, in both, and how assessment applies and how assessment links everything together. And there's going to be a kind of gap fill that we're going to be doing together afterwards. So there is a test after this, so pay attention. But let's begin by watching the video.
What we measure, we can improve. That's how, as a coach or an English teacher, I find the best ways to help my learners succeed. Things can get tough, and improving isn't easy. The key is to assess the progress they are making, to know what they can do, so I can give feedback that will help build their confidence and keep them motivated. With Cambridge, assessment is integrated with learning, helping me measure and guide my learners' progress, so they learn what they need to succeed, to get the most from every moment, to help their worlds grow. Because Cambridge is where your world grows.
So, my apologies, I got the sport wrong, which goes to show I know much more about English than I know about sports. That there was a basketball hoop, but I keep forgetting that it's actually football, not basketball. So, what we measure, we can improve. The key is to they are so to what they can so I can give that will help build their and keep them So, any guesses on the chat box as to what might be the missing words? Let me see if there are people picking up. The challenge. So there is going to be assess there. Maria Celeste says assess for the first one. Do we have any guesses for the next ones? Assess the progress. Okay. Give feedback. Something about feedback, says Marcela too. Let's see. The key is to assess the progress that they are making, to know what they can do. So, to assess the progress they're making, in order to do what? To know what they can do, so that I can give feedback that will help build their confidence and keep them motivated. So, what we measure, we can improve. We want to assess the progress that learners are making to know what they can do. Not because we want to just gather information, but because we want to get a picture of how things are going. And then we do that so that we can give feedback to build their confidence and keep their motivation in learning, and also, of course, to help them develop. Which brings me back to a question, and I apologize because I think in pretty much every session I do, and even if you ask me to do a session about life in Buenos Aires, Argentina, I am probably going to find a way to include this definition of assessment because I just love it so much. And it's my favorite definition of assessment by the great Tim McNamara. And Tim said in 2010 that assessment is a process, and that is already relevant because assessment is not a moment, assessment is not one thing that we do. Assessment is a process that is ongoing, a process that happens over time. And it's a process of doing what? Number one, step one, of observing evidence from performance. The reason we assess is that we cannot see learning. I mean, I cannot really open a window into a learner's brain, like pick up a bit of their head, of their skulls, and just look inside and see the present perfect. I cannot see how much they can do just by looking at their brains or sticking a thermometer in their ears or using some kind of fancy machinery. We haven't, fortunately, I would say, invented that yet. So the only thing that we can do, or the one thing that we can do, that we have to do, is if we want to look at things that we can do, things that we know, things that we can use, a competence that we develop, is to ask somebody to do something and then to see how they do it, to observe, to pay very close attention to what they do. I cannot see the present perfect inside your head, but I can ask you to use it. Or I can put you in a situation that would require that. Or I can ask you to fill in gaps or to complete an exercise or to solve an exercise, let's say, to do an activity that will require you, that will force you to use it. So the first thing I have to do is to ask you to do something and observe how you do it and pick up the evidence from that performance. And then I am going to interpret that. Then I am going to say this is correct, this is incorrect, this is good enough, this is not good enough. I have this is what I expected, more than I expected, less than I expected. We can interpret it in many different ways, but we interpret that to do what? To reach conclusions about what individuals know, what individuals can do. So we reach a conclusion about things they know, things they can do, and that's the end of the process, right? So it's like, I have seen you do something, I graded you, and then based on how I graded you, I said, you meet the requirements for the course. Let's imagine that we are talking about something big like that. Well, there is something missing here, something really important, which is that we do all this in order to make decisions based on those conclusions. Assessment is only complete when we do something, when something happens. Assessment is only complete when something changes afterwards. If we are only collecting information, grading that information, and that's the end of the process, that is not assessment. That is a boring and a very effortful and boring way of wasting people's time by asking them to do exercises and complete tests. But assessment is actually, it is only completed when something changes afterwards. Two big takeaways. We cannot define assessment without thinking about teaching and learning. And number two, we cannot talk about assessment without talking about what we do next. And this applies, and this is one of the many beauties of this definition. This applies to every kind of assessment, not just exams, not just tests, not just like the big Cambridge exam, but also to the many instances of assessment that happen in the course of any lesson. We are teaching a lesson, and we are looking at our learners' faces. Or we ask them, do you understand this? Is everything okay? And they say, yeah, all good. And some will say, yeah, and some of them will be doing this, and some will be doing this with their phones, or this. So how many people are, and how many people are, is going to give you a sign of something. So what do? We look at that evidence, we interpret that. Okay, there are a lot of people are saying that they understand, but some are saying that they really don't. We reach a conclusion. They are not where I would like them to be, because I really need everybody to be on board with, or to be sure about this thing that I just presented. So we make a decision, and the decision is, okay, I'm going to give one more example. I am going to revisit that explanation. I'm going to give one more activity, one more basic activity. We're going to stay on this. Or everybody said yes, or basically I look at my learners as they speak, or I observe the language and I see that they are using whatever phrase or tense or expression or strategy that we have just seen. They are using it successfully, freely in their speech. So what do? I interpret that. I reach a conclusion. They are where I would like them to be. They are ready for the next step. And I make a decision. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next thing, and I'm going to give them one more level of complexity. I'm going to complicate their lives a little bit. So we are always assessing. Sometimes we are assessing small things in the course of a classroom. Sometimes we are assessing really big things, like if you think of an exam like Cambridge B1, like a Cambridge exam, Cambridge B1 preliminary, B2 first. That is a really big question that we are asking. That is a lot of things that we are observing, because basically what we want to know is, does this learner have a B1 level or a B2 level of English? And that covers a lot of things. To answer that question, we need to ask our students we need to ask learners to do things, to give us a lot of evidence. Interpreting that evidence is, let's say, complicated or is a bigger challenge. Reaching a conclusion is a bigger deal. And then we are still going to have to think about what happens next. Sometimes that decision can be like the very formal one, like you pass the course, or you are ready to enter university or to be exempted from this language requirement because you meet the standards, you pass the test. Sometimes it's going to be, okay, I can see that your writing is not exactly where I would like it to be, or, I mean, your writing is not as good as your other skills. You did really well, but your writing was not as good as we expected it to be. So next year, or in the next course, or in the next term, we're going to focus on your writing. So you make a decision. We are going to change the syllabus to adapt to what you need. I'm going to give you extra support on that, and I am going to boost your strengths in listening. So we make our decision from the smallest things to the biggest things. So there was a time which brings us to the main idea of integrated learning and assessment, which is at some point until, say, 30 years ago, it was actually longer than that. Say 40 years ago, but 30 years ago, it's when everybody kind of stopped using this. We used to think in terms of there is teaching and then there is learning. I teach something, my students learn it. And that's the thing. If I teach it and they don't learn it, maybe I taught it wrong, or maybe they were not able to learn it. But it's two separate things happening, and one comes after the other. We have definitely developed from that. We have become, our thinking about teaching and learning has changed, has evolved. And now we think of teaching and learning, I love to think of them as a yin-yang. We talk about the teaching-learning process, and we talk about how teaching and learning are basically one learning cycle in which there is a role for the facilitator, if you think like kind of Vygotsky constructivist. And that role is the part where the teaching comes. So there is the learning that is going on, and there is a role for the more experienced person, the teacher, the facilitator of that process. But actually there is an element missing there. There is a missing link, which is that actually teaching, learning, and assessment are the three things that happen together. Because without assessment, there cannot be learning. Think about a baby learning to walk, a toddler learning to walk. So they stand up, they fall down. They stand up, they fall down. They stand up, they fall down. If they stand up and fall down the same way every single time, and they just repeat what they do, I do it, something happens, I do it again, I do it again, I do it again the same way, that baby is never going to learn to walk. Because what is it that actually happens? They stand up, they fall down this way. So what do? They stand up in a slightly different way, and they fall down the other way. So they stand up in another way, and then they are wobbly, and then they fall down again. And what happens is, I stand up, I do something happens as a result. And then there is an analysis, there is an assessment of that. Okay, I fell down the other way when I changed this. So now I am going to change something else. I'm going to do more of that other thing. Okay, too much, I fell down the other way. So eventually there comes to a point where the competence has developed but to do that, to actually learn to walk, the toddler, the baby, has to be assessing all the time, assessing and replanning and changing. Without that assessment step, without that analysis, without that reflection, there cannot be learning. So assessment, learning, and teaching happen I saw this referred to as a tri-yang, which is like the yin-yang sign with three elements in it. So assessment, teaching, and learning happen as three aspects of one cycle. We call that cycle integrated learning and assessment. So that is the core of what I want to talk about today. So it is basically simple maths. If you've been following, we have milk in this picture. We have milk, we add coffee, and we get latte. Or actually, it's the other way around. We have coffee, and then to the coffee, we add the milk, and then we get this beautiful latte here. So it's basically, if we think about teaching, learning, assessment, it's basically kind of similar, right? We teach, then we assess, and the result of that is learning. Right? Wrong. Because actually, look at this picture. There is no coffee. There is no milk. What are you looking at in this picture? There is no coffee in the picture. There is no milk in that image. This is my Zen moment. There is only latte. When you look at that cup, you cannot really say where the coffee ends and the milk begins, right? They have blended, they have become something else. Well, in a similar way, there is no teaching, there is no learning, there is no assessment, there is only learning happening. And then whatever we do as facilitators of that, whatever our learners do in their processing, in their mental processes, which is actually where the learning happens, and whatever happens in their self-assessment, in our assessment of that, and how that integrates, it's not three separate things, it's not three separate activities. Yes, we can look at things that happen at different moments, but it's basically three angles, three aspects of the same thing. There is no coffee, there is no milk, there is only latte. And we call that integrated learning and assessment. Let me see in the chat box if there's any comments, questions, or feedback so far. I cannot see latte. Yes, absolutely latte. It's great for this time of day. I mean, it works better. If we had done this session in the morning, then it would be, the latte would be even more appropriate. But for this time of day, I'm ready for a cup of coffee to sort of pep me up and refresh me. Right after this, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. So integrated learning and assessment is this blending of things. By the way, I haven't been paying a lot of attention. I apologize to the chatbots. Let me see. I see some beautiful comments here. Assessment indicates what and how we're going on afterwards. Feedback is a must. Students thrive from it. Trust me when I tell you, you're going to be hearing a lot more about this next. So how do we do that, this integration of learning and assessment, you're asking? Because everything sounds great, but I need to make that happen. So how do I make that happen? Well, simple. 4 pillars: alignment, working on mindset, and then 4 actions. 4 pillars: alignment, mindset, 4 actions. Let's begin by the 4 pillars. The 4 pillars of learning and assessment are these: learning objectives, evidence of progress, actionable feedback, tailored follow-up, and then we loop back to the beginning, because everything in learning and teaching is a cycle, right? Everything we are always coming back to the beginning. Vygotsky said it's a spiral. When we are learning, then we come back and we are in a slightly different place, but still kind of in the same place. But so let's focus on these individually. Pillar number 1, learning objectives. So the first step is for teachers, educational leaders to understand, number 1, our curriculum objectives. We need to set goals. Sometimes those objectives are set by national standards or my institutional goals. There are other times where I am much freer. If I am teaching adults in private lessons, then basically I do needs analysis. And then based on the needs analysis, we decide what we are going to do or what you would like to do or what is actually right for you. But without objectives, we cannot really say that something is good or bad, a lot or not enough. Without an objective, you're just swimming in the ocean. When you're swimming in the ocean and you cannot see a beach anywhere in sight, you're just moving, but there isn't a sense of direction. Learning shouldn't be like that. So the first step is to understand our curriculum objectives, to understand how we identify success in the courses. How am I going to know that things are progressing, that things are moving forward? And then what resources are available to help students achieve those goals? And learning objectives need to do a number of things. A good learning objective should be aligned with the general objectives for the course or the period of study. So if I have a learning objective for a lesson or a unit, it needs to connect to my larger goal, right? Otherwise, why am I doing that? It should be adequate for the student's level, not too easy, not too difficult, not too high, not too low. It should come at the right moment. It should help. It should be adequate for where the learner is. And there should be a success criteria, concrete examples of what successful performance looks like. How am I going to know as a learner that I am doing better? How am I going to know as a teacher that my learners are improving? I need to think about this and I need to communicate this at the beginning. So setting goals and objectives, one way of doing it, one that we do very often, is a shopping list. Shopping list approach is basically listing what the learners will be doing in the lesson. So does it remind a teacher of what to do next if we basically say present perfect, reading, listening, use of English part 3? Yes. Well, it's useful to us. It's the way actually when we don't properly plan a lesson very thoroughly, but we are just blotting down bullet points of what we're going to do. It's useful to us to have the smallest, most minimalist script for a lesson that you can have. Does it inform learners of the content and the tasks that we're going to cover in the lesson? Well, yes. But does it tell learners what they will be able to do better by the end of a lesson? Not if you do it like that. Let me show you a couple of examples. We have this one. So learning objectives for a B2 First course, for a preparation for B2 First course, similar lesson, you could have the one on the right or the one on the left. One of them is a shopping list. The other one is different. The other one is thinking more in terms of learning objectives and setting success criteria. So focus for today's lesson, reading and use of English Part 4, reading for gist, reading for detail. That's clearly a shopping list. That's a list of things we'll be covering. Now, on the other one, we'll have read. So what you will be able to do better by the end of today's lesson, read quickly and understand the main ideas in a text. That is basically the same as reading for gist. Work out the meaning of unfamiliar words for context. That is one particular skill that we're going to do in our reading for detail, and that is going to be useful for Part 4. We're going to use strategies for Part 4 gap fill. And then we're going to reflect, review, and discuss next steps, which is the class review and discussion at the end. So one is a shopping list, the other is a learning goal. So the other set learning goals. And I think you will agree with me that the one on the right, the learning goals, is much more useful for learners. So a practical idea on how to make this happen naturally is to plan a lesson backwards. What do I mean? What I mean is, when we are planning the lesson, we usually begin by, this is going to be the topic, this is going to be the theme of a unit, or the topic that we're going to cover, or the thing that is going to do. This is what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to assess. Okay, let's do it the other way around. Let's visualize the learners successfully doing the objective that I want to do at the end of a lesson. So they are using the tense, they are using the vocabulary, they are using the strategy, they are solving the exercise, they are writing the text. Whatever it is, they're having the conversation, whatever it is we're doing. What are they doing? And how do I know that they demonstrate that achievement? How do I know that they're doing it right? And then I work backwards. So when I have that vision, when I can see them do that, when I can visualize that, I can create the success criteria. How do I know that they're doing it? Well, now that I have seen them do it in my mind, okay, this is my success criteria, and then I'm going to work backwards. Okay, thinking about where they are right now, what do they need to develop in order to get to that place? And this is going to be my actual teaching or practice or whatever. So we're looking at how to think of a lesson the other way around. So if we plan the lesson backwards, the learning objective is actually going to be the first thing that we are thinking about. And it's going to be the first thing that we communicate to our students when we're teaching the class. Okay, oopsie, there we go. So we said 4 pillars. Let's look at the second one. The second one is evidence of progress. So collecting evidence of progress allows us to see how students are progressing towards their goal. We do it formally and informally. Formal evaluation is more like activities, tests, etc. Informal evaluation is basically looking at their faces or a number of other things. Anything that shows what students know, what students can do. So we should collect as much evidence as we can, and that evidence should be as varied as possible. And this is ILA in action. This is the thing that is helping us respond on the fly to support or challenge the students. Essentially, one way of looking at assessment is that assessment is basically an attitude, and it is an attitude of being responsive, of being very aware and present in the classroom, of noticing the learning process and as much of it as we can in as many different ways as we can, and responding to it. So there is another approach to looking at it, more like the Zen, the mindset approach. Assessment is a mindset when we are aware, when we are present, aware, and responsive. That's another way of looking at it. And we collect evidence of progress in a number of ways using a number of instruments and devices. So we monitor while learners are working. We are looking at a page from the activity book in Cambridge Primary Path, Level 2. So you can see activities here that we can use to monitor while learners are working and looking at how they respond to classic activities like that. We can review answers or the writing that they have done at home, which has more of an element of integration and reflection. We invite learner responses with things like these checklists. So, was this difficult? Was this easy? Did you do this? This is a great example, by the way, of this writing checklist of learning objectives and success criteria at work. These are 3 things that were important in the piece of writing that we did. Have I done them? Tick, tick, tick. Oh, I haven't done this. Maybe I need to go back and review what I did. And then we can do this in a more systematic way or using some of the more classic formative assessment instruments. Here I put an example of a classic, which is the KWL chart. I don't know if you, in case you haven't seen it, in a KWL chart, this is something that you can do at the beginning and end of a lesson, or bridging the beginning and end, or at the end, in which you have 3 columns. So in column number 1, I know this. You can do this at the beginning of the lesson. This is what I know that is connected with this topic, or at the end, this is what I know now. I want to know my next goals. Okay, this is what I know. This is what I know now. What do I think? What do I want to know next? What is the next step from what I know today? And I learned. What I learned is, what did I learn this class? What did I learn this unit? What did I learn today? So an element of metacognition, an element of goal setting, and an element of reflection on the learning that has happened, let's say, very recently. This is a great instrument you can use. It's basically an invitation to do this kind of self-awareness activity, self-assessment activity. And then we measure evidence against success criteria, because we are always going back to our success criteria. A way to do this is to encourage self and peer assessment. And I am mentioning this here because of the second line here. Start with self-assessment. Start with self-assessment, but build up to self-assessment. So we cannot just give a learner a piece of let's say they do homework, a piece of writing, they give it to us, we do our feedback to them is write it better. And probably a response would be, well, teacher, if I had known how to write it better, I would have written it better, wouldn't I? I'm not masochist like that. The thing is, we want to drive them to that improvement. It's like, write that this paragraph is not really clear. Make it more clear. Is that sort of enough? Is that enough on step 1? Well, no, we have to build up to these things. So we can begin with anonymous text, like example paragraphs that are not clear. Then we can move on to anonymous paragraphs from random people in the class or from another class and say, how can we improve this? What makes this paragraph not so clear? Then we move on to self-assessment. Then we move on to peer assessment and so on. But we need to think of the development of the self-assessment skill. And then pillar number 3. Pillar number 3 is actionable feedback. So we have the goals, we gather the evidence, and now we give feedback. Feedback is the response to what students do. It can be a passing comment, just a comment, or sometimes even a gesture. In speaking, for instance, we do a lot of feedback by gestures. Or it can be a very elaborate report, which would fit something like writing better. Effective feedback, and this is super important, is actionable. It describes what happened, but it says what to do next. Feedback is not just, this is good, this is not so good. Feedback is, this is not so good. So you did this really well. This was not great. this is how you can improve this. Or if you have problems with this, this can help you. So good feedback looks at what happened, assesses it, judges it, blah, 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 but it guides you on your next step. It's the feed forward element. And feedback is the heart of ILA. Teachers collect evidence, reflect on the evidence, they use it for students to progress and to learn better, because to teach is to give effective feedback. And what makes feedback effective and actionable? A number of things. Effective feedback should link directly to the learning objectives and to the success criteria, because that's why we have learning objectives. That's what the success criteria is for. It should include evidence of progress reinforcing good performance, not just what you did wrong. These are 5 mistakes you made, but what you did right. Then it should be accessible. It should be understandable. It should be in a language I can understand, given to me at the right time, at the right moment. And it should be actionable. It should be something I can do something about. And it should help me do that thing. If the feedback is, you write really badly, Pablo, what can I do about that? Pablo, you suck. Okay, how do I stop sucking? So, or you suck. Okay, I suck, so I'll just stop trying. I'm not good at this. I will never be good at English. I will never write well. That is not what we are after. What we are after is, what can help me be better, concretely? And the last of the 4 pillars is the follow-up. And the follow-up needs to be tailored. The following steps are tailored and customized to give each student what they need to advance to the next level. This is where we think of things like personalized learning. This is where we start thinking about how differentiation. And this is where, if you're thinking of a differentiated classroom, multi-levels, or giving each student the thing that they need based on what they did, basically you need assessment for that. And assessment should be about changing what I do next. Remember that the last step in our definition of assessment is to think of what to do next, to make a decision. This is where ILA becomes essential to learner-centered teaching, because to teach is to respond to student needs to best meet the learning objectives. So the tailored follow-up is the moment in which we are not just giving feedback. What we are doing is changing how we teach, or what we teach next, or what kind of activities we do, or what suggestions we make. Something is going to change based on what happened. This is responding. This is when we are actually responding to our students. And when we do that, we are actually being learner-centered. We are actually focused not on my syllabus and today is Tuesday, I need to be doing this. Or today we are going to be doing exercises 3, 4, and 5, or page 23, or whatever. Today, we are going to respond to what you did last time. And we are going to do something based on that, which is going to take us to our objectives, but it is going to be tailored to how you are doing. Sometimes you individually, sometimes you as a whole. A lot of learners are struggling with the difference between for and since. In sentences like, I've done it for 5 years, I've done it since 2020. Okay, cool. Now, so because a lot of learners, enough learners struggled on this in our last activity, my tailored follow-up is, let's review that topic. Let's read another passage that is going to help us do this. Let's do more activities. Whatever. That is tailored follow-up. It doesn't need to be one by one. One by one is ideal, not always possible. And tailored follow-up is when we use evidence gathered in lessons to ensure that. Number one, strong learners are challenged. And I say this first because we often forget about this. We think about the learners that are not doing so great. But what about the ones that are actually doing so well that we can see that they are not really progressing? Learners, everybody should be challenged. And sometimes, for some learners, it's going to mean that differentiation is going to be something a little bit harder for you and a little bit more advanced. And then, of course, yes, weaker learners are supported because we want everybody to improve. We want everybody to get better. And then that learner interests and preferences are included whenever possible. And finally, that teaching evolves and improves to meet learner needs. Sometimes assessment is also something that we use to understand how the things that we are doing are impacting learners. I tried this teaching strategy, or I presented this using this kind of approach. Was it effective with my learners? Many of them are not responding well to this kind of input or this kind of presentation. Okay, next time I'm going to try something else. I tried it with a text, it didn't work. Next time I will try it with video. I tried it by just going into practice really quickly. Okay, next time I'm going to try explaining it first, or developing an explanation first, and then moving into the practice. Based on how learners do, we approach them differently, or we approach them in ways which are more relevant to them. We are responding to what they do. And this is a quote from Stephen Siresi, an assessment theorist, and he wrote this amazing analogy. Theoretically, a physician could interpret an X-ray, so you go to the doctor, they say, do the X-ray, and could not act upon the information in subsequent treatment of a patient. So I go to the doctor says you need an X-ray so that I know what you have and what the best treatment for you is. I take I do the X-ray, I bring it to the doctor doesn't look at my X-ray, and they just tell me what to do without looking at the X-ray. A doctor could do that. Similarly, an elementary school mathematics teacher can interpret a child's maths test score. They got a 7 out of 10. I'm going to interpret that, blah, blah, okay, I got it, and ignore that information when planning instruction for a child. Or I could say a teacher could have students that did a Cambridge exam at the end of last year, but then they are not, at the beginning of next year, they are not using the information to adapt the syllabus, to do more listening, to focus on the writing, to look at what individual learners need based on their Cambridge results. It would be natural to ask the physician or the teacher why they administer these assessments if they were not going to use them, right? But perhaps a rhetorical question is better. Would you want this physician as your doctor or this teacher for your child? So basically, my conclusion here is don't be that teacher. So which brings us back to now we have seen the 4 pillars of the ILA cycle: learning objectives, evidence of progress, actionable feedback, tailored follow-up. This is supported, or this is grounded, this requires alignments. Alignment of what? First, our curriculum needs to be aligned with the materials that we are using, right? Because if our curriculum says we need to do this, and I am working with materials that bring me in this direction, or that don't include all of this, or include other stuff, or use a different approach, whatever, that is not going to help. That needs to be aligned with assessment. Curriculum, materials, and assessment have to align as much as possible. Ideally, perfectly, but as much as possible. Because if I am assessing in a way that is different from the materials or my approach in teaching, and none of that is matches my curriculum, assessment is not going to be helpful, because it is not going to speak to what happened in the classroom. It is not going to speak to what my curriculum tells me should be happening. And all of that needs to be aligned with my teacher training, or with the teacher that I am, or the teachers that we have in our institution, or the kind of teaching that we think is best. And I need something else. I need to work on mindsets, which is another way of thinking of alignment. We need to think of the mindset of school leaders. When leaders approach us, when school leaders, heads, coordinators, owners, whatever, take an assessment strategy, or use an assessment instrument or adopt a Cambridge exam, what are their expectations? Are they thinking of that as we want an exam to drive learning forward? Or are they thinking of we want an exam so that everybody passes with an A and everybody's happy? So are they thinking of a mindset where if some learners don't do well, this is actually evidence that we can use to give feedback and to provide tailored follow-up? Or are they thinking that if some students don't do very well, it's the end of the world and then parents will hate us and they will take the child out of the school, we will be out of a job, my school will shut down, everybody will be miserable? So one mindset is going to help, the other not so much. What about the mindset of the teachers? Again, are they looking at everybody passing with an A because otherwise people will think that I am a terrible teacher, or I will think that my students are complete failures? Or are they going to take that as evidence for feedback and follow-up? The mindset of students. If you think of assessment as the thing that is going to tell you if you are great or you suck, that is not, then assessment is going to be a terrible moment. If you think of assessment as an opportunity to improve your learning process, everything will be different. And then, of course, the mindset of the families or the community, because very often in a school setting, you know this much better than I, it is the parents, the families, that are the school community that is driving a certain attitude to assessment. Why did my child not get an A in the exam? You failed, my child failed, the world is a horrible place and it's your fault. So ideally, to have an ILA approach or to integrate learning and assessment successfully, we want the mindsets, the attitudes, the beliefs of all of these people to be in an ILA frame, in an ILA mindset. And this is something that we can drive as teachers, as school leaders, to a certain extent. And we do that through 4 actions. We do that through place, improve, prepare, and prove. So the first thing we do is we place learners at the right level, or we identify where they are related to the syllabus, related to the goals. And we do that at the beginning of our courses. We improve their language competence. It is very easy to just say it like that. You improve it. No hard work, right? You know how much hard work goes into that, but that is what we do. Then we prepare learners for success, improving their language competence and in using English for communication. And then we prove their success in improving their language to themselves and to the world through formal tests, through certifications, through qualifications, which open doors for future learning. So, and all of that is surrounded by the professional learning and development that we do as teachers or that the institution does. So, in a nutshell, this is kind of another way of looking at what we do. And where does assessment happen? Here, assessment happens every step of the way. We use assessment to place learners, diagnostic assessment. We do a lot of formative assessment or a formative use of assessment in the improvement. When we prepare, we are looking at assessment and we are using, again, lots of diagnostic assessment to understand how our learners are compared to my end goal. And then, of course, at the proving, there is the we take that big exam at the end. And that big exam is going to take us back to the beginning of the next learning cycle, and it is going to feed into the curriculum and how we're going to approach that course, or how we are going to help that learner improve even more. And we call that, my friends, integrated learning and assessment. I think you know the song by now. So another way of looking at it is a phrase that we use in Cambridge too, which is that integrated learning and assessment is about getting the most from every moment of learning. That the point of assessment is at every moment of learning to help make the most of it, to help make it really as meaningful and as impactful as it can be. So what are your next steps? Because we have a few minutes left. So just a couple of very, very practical things. Where can I learn more about this? What can I do next? Number one, there's a website, cambridge.org/ILA. Then I'm going to give you something really quick. I'm going to give you something very quick. I'm going to give you something really practical. And I'm going to give you something a bit more theoretical. So lots of choices in the resources that I will be sharing now. First of all, the website. We put all of these things together in cambridge.org/ILA. We have teacher testimonials about how they use and approach ILA. We have a video about why Cambridge believes in ILA, a link to all of the resources that I'm going to mention now, and then what Cambridge products bring ILA to life. Something really quick. On the website, you will find this quiz. And this is like a Cosmo quiz, only that this is not going to tell you who your celebrity crush is. It's going to tell you where you are on the ILA journey. So it's going to ask you questions, and it's going to ask you to explore these ideas and to rate it from always to never. And there may be things here where you answer never, like, I never even considered that. Okay, that's fine, that's fair, that's a great opportunity to actually think about it and to start doing it. Then something really practical, the Guide to Integrated Learning and Assessment in Your Teaching. The guide goes over the 4 pillars of ILA really, really quickly and presents practical ideas to implement each of the 4 pillars. I showed you a couple of them through the session today. And then there are 23 ideas that are ready to bring into your classrooms tomorrow. So what do they look like? First of all, let's think of the pillar is learning objectives. So what do you need to know? The first thing that the guide does is to review this pillar and what it is. It gives you a reflection task to get you thinking about it. And then it gives you ideas, 23 of them. So at least around 5 or 6 for each of the pillars. That's a lot. That's enough to get you going, right? And it's really practical stuff that you can bring into your classrooms. And then something a little bit more theoretical, something for those of you who like to do a bit more of protein in your reading and who like to approach things from that kind of reflective place, is our white paper. The white paper is like a position statement, like a longer document that says, this is what Cambridge University Press and Assessment believes about the power of integrated learning and assessment. Our white paper explores the 4 pillars in detail. It offers tips on how to develop them and how to implement an ILA approach. The authors represent the best of Cambridge expertise. So we have Angeliki Salamoura, which is sort of one of the main leaders of our research area, research in pedagogy and assessment area. We have Matthew Ellman, a great teacher trainer. If you haven't seen a webinar or if you haven't been to a session done face-to-face or online by Matt Ellman, you owe yourselves that. Go to the Cambridge YouTube channel, check out anything that Matt's done. He's incredible. He's an incredible teacher trainer. Claire Harrison comes from evaluation. She's one of our assessment researchers. She's got a lot of experience in developing and implementing assessment. And then Jasmine Silver is a textbook author. So you can see how ILA integrates in the authors of this document. It integrates the best Cambridge has to offer and everything that Cambridge English does. And finally, they got advice from the best. What can I say? They asked me for my opinion, and I have to say, I hope the document is better for it. So having said all that, having shared all of these resources, which will be included on the follow-up email that you will be receiving really soon, my only question to you is, do you have any questions? For that, I will be sharing my screen and I will be keeping an eye on the chat box to see if there, and in the Q&A to see if there are any questions that you have. So Celes, Is there anything I've missed?
No, there's nothing in the chat box or in the chat, in the Q&A or in the
Okay.
chat box. Just very nice comments for you, Pablo.
Oh,
As
you're too kind,
Pablo
people.
mentioned, you are going to receive this information in the follow-up email that is coming to your inboxes. I think it's going to be on Thursday, so keep an eye on that. I think there are no
And
questions.
oh, I have a question for you, Celeste, which I'm sure somebody asked in the chat box. Where is the certificate?
In the follow-up email.
That
So
question
you are going
always comes up.
to, you'll receive the certificate of attendance, the recording of this session, and the link to all these resources.
Okay. So in that case, if there are no questions, having said all that, the only thing I have to say is thank you for your time. I hope I have earned the privilege of your time tonight, and I hope you have an amazing rest of the evening.
Thank you, Pablo, as always.
Thank you,
Bye,
Celeste.
everyone.
Goodbye,
Have a nice
everybody.
afternoon. Bye.